The first time I stepped into that gym with Michael, I thought it would be just another attempt at fixing what felt broken between us. Michael and I had been together for 4 years. In the beginning, every moment felt alive with laughter, shared secrets, and small gestures of affection. But lately, our days had turned into routine, silent dinners, distracted conversations, and a lingering sense of distance that neither of us wanted to name. When Michael suggested we join the gym together, I agreed. Perhaps sweating side by side would remind us of the connection we used to feel. I told myself it was worth trying, even if my heart wasn't sure. The gym itself was buzzing with energy, machines clanging, music pounding through the speakers, the faint smell of rubber mats and determination hanging in the air. People moved with purpose, bodies glistening under the fluorescent lights. I felt out of place at first, but then my eyes settled on someone who seemed to command the room without even trying. That was Ryan. He was on the mat near the front, doing push-ups with perfect form. His movements were smooth, controlled, almost rhythmic, as though he had rehearsed them 1,000 times. His focus didn't waver, not even when the room around him shifted with noise and distraction. There was something magnetic in the way his body aligned with every push, as if discipline and confidence lived in his muscles. That I caught myself watching longer than I should have. A strange spark stirred inside me, something I hadn't felt in months. Michael was beside me, scrolling on his phone between sets, barely glancing up. That contrast cut deeper than I expected. Ryan absorbed in his discipline, Michael absorbed in a glowing screen. First time here, a voice pulled me back. That it was Ryan, standing now, towel slung around his neck, sweat darkening the fabric of his shirt. His eyes held the kind of warmth that made it easy to forget the noise of the gym. I nodded, introducing myself quickly, trying not to sound too eager. Daniel, right? He repeated, as though committing it to memory. Don't worry. Everyone feels lost at first. Stick with it, and you'll find your rhythm. His encouragement was casual, yet it lingered with me. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Michael finally looked up, offering Ryan a polite smile before returning to his phone. He seemed uninterested in conversation, uninterested in me, uninterested in anything but the small world behind that screen. A part of me tried to dismiss the sting, but another part, the quieter one I rarely acknowledged, began to whisper that maybe this was why I felt so hollow. As Ryan moved on to another exercise, I found my eyes following him. His confidence contrasted sharply with the emptiness I felt standing next to Michael. I hated myself for noticing, hated myself even more for caring. Still, when Ryan passed by again later and offered to adjust my stance, his hands steadying my shoulders, I didn't pull away. Like this, he said gently, guiding me into position. Form matters more than speed. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent a wave of awareness through me that I couldn't explain. I felt my chest tighten, not from the workout, but from the realization that someone other than Michael could still make me feel alive. That night, as Michael drove us home, silence filled the car. He tapped at his phone at every red light, chuckling at messages I wasn't part of. I stared out the window, pretending the city lights were enough to distract me. But my mind kept returning to Ryan, his voice, his encouragement, the steady weight of his hand correcting my form. That I told myself it was nothing, just a moment, a flicker of attraction born out of loneliness. Yet deep down, I knew it was something else. Something dangerous. Something that might not stop here, and though I tried to push the thought away, a quiet confession formed in the back of my mind. In that single evening at the gym, something shifted inside me. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew this story was only just. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of quiet companionship. Adrian and I grew inseparable, our doors swinging open as though hinges no longer mattered. Meals were shared, study notes exchanged, and the silence of midnight hours filled with conversations that left us more entangled than either of us dared to admit. The hostel had hundreds of boys, yet it often felt like Adrian and I lived in a world apart, divided from the rest by invisible walls. But beneath the comfort of routine, unease grew. I caught myself watching him too long, memorizing the curve of his smile or the sound of his laughter. Each glance carried a weight I could no longer deny. And though I told myself to step back, to reclaim the distance we had so easily discarded, I found it impossible. Adrian had become a gravitational pull, and I was helplessly caught in his orbit. The conflict within me sharpened whenever Michael's name appeared. Adrian would occasionally mention him, never with enthusiasm, never with the warmth I expected from someone speaking of love. Once, when his phone rang during dinner, I noticed the name glowing on his screen. He silenced it, muttering something about bad timing, and continued eating as though nothing had happened. I said nothing, but my chest tightened with a mix of curiosity and guilt. Why was he ignoring the man he claimed to love? One evening, we lingered in my room long after most lights in the hostel had gone dark. Our books lay forgotten on the desk, and we sat cross-legged on the floor, speaking in low tones. Adrian confessed that he often felt misunderstood, that Michael expected things from him he could not always give. His words were steady, but his eyes betrayed a vulnerability he rarely allowed others to see. I wanted to comfort him, to say something meaningful, but all I managed was silence. In that silence, I realized my role was shifting. I was no longer just his friend. I was becoming his confidant, the one who knew the cracks in his carefully constructed armor. Guilt gnawed at me. I should have set boundaries, should have reminded him of the man waiting for him elsewhere. Yet the truth was crueler. I didn't want to. I wanted to be the one he turned to, the one who filled the void Michael seemed unable to reach. Each word he spoke deepened my longing and eroded my resolve. The night of confession came quietly, almost tenderly. We had been arguing over something trivial, whether he should reconcile with Michael or demand more honesty from him. I had spoken with unusual sharpness, frustration boiling over, not at Michael but at the invisible tether that bound Adrian away from me. He fell silent, staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. And then, without warning, he leaned forward and pressed his lips against mine. The kiss was brief but electric, shattering the fragile wall I had clung to for weeks. When he pulled away, the air between us seemed charged, the silence deafening. My heart pounded as I searched his face for regret, but all I saw was confusion, confusion that mirrored my own. We sat there, eyes locked, caught between desire and dread. Neither of us spoke of it the next day. Yet the current between us had shifted irreversibly. Every word, every gesture carried the echo of that moment. And though we tried to pretend otherwise, the truth hovered like a storm cloud. We had crossed a line. That night, Adrian returned to my room. There were no excuses this time, no pretense of study or conversation. He closed the door softly behind him, and in the quiet that followed, we gave in to what we had both been resisting. The weight of secrecy pressed down on me even as I felt the exhilaration of closeness I had long imagined. It was everything I had wanted, and everything I feared. When dawn broke, the world outside continued as though nothing had changed. Boys shouted in the corridor, breakfast smells drifted from the mess hall, and life resumed its predictable rhythm. But for me, nothing was the same. I lay awake long after Adrian slipped back into his own room, replaying every detail, every breath. The thrill was intoxicating, but beneath it lurked a shadow I could not ignore, that we had betrayed someone who trusted him, someone who deserved honesty. I had stepped willingly into the role of the intruder, the secret. The thought should have filled me with shame, but instead, it left me torn, between guilt and the dangerous sweetness of having what I had silently desired, and as I stared at the ceiling, I knew with painful clarity, the path ahead would not be simple. What had begun with a knock on the door had become something neither of us could control. The first few weeks in Daniel's new apartment passed in an almost sacred quiet. It was a small space, just one bedroom and a balcony overlooking a narrow street, but to him, it felt vast. For the first time in years, every corner of his life was his own. There were no echoes of Emily's footsteps, no polite small talk at breakfast, no need to pretend that silence was comfort. That he spent his mornings by the window, coffee in hand, watching people go about their lives below. The city was alive with movement, strangers laughing, children racing to school, shopkeepers opening shutters, and for the first time, Daniel didn't feel like a spectator. He felt part of it, even if his place in it was still uncertain. Each day became a quiet act of rediscovery. He started painting again, pulling out the old brushes he'd packed away years ago. The first strokes were clumsy, hesitant, like a language he once spoke fluently but had forgotten. Yet as days passed, the rhythm returned. Color began to speak where words once failed. Sometimes, in the stillness between brushstrokes, his thoughts drifted back to Emily. He missed her kindness, her steadiness, the way she hummed while cooking. But he didn't miss the silence, the kind that came from both of them pretending everything was fine. He hoped she was finding her own peace, just as he was learning to find his point one afternoon. As the sunlight poured through the window, Daniel received a message on his phone. It was from Ethan. "Ethan, just checking in. How's the new place treating you?" Daniel smiled faintly before replying, "Daniel, quiet. Honest. Different. I think I needed that." "Ethan, you sound lighter." "I'm glad." The conversation was brief but grounding. There was no tension, no hidden meaning, just two people who had shared a moment of truth and learned from it. Ethan had never been the cause of Daniel's change, he had simply been the mirror reflecting what Daniel had long refused to see. That evening, Daniel took a walk through the neighborhood. The air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine. Couples strolled past him, holding hands, and for the first time, he didn't feel envy or confusion. He simply felt human. That he stopped by a small cafe on the corner, a quiet place where the walls were lined with books and the hum of soft music filled the air. He ordered tea and found a seat near the window. As he sipped slowly, a thought settled over him like a calm realization. Peace didn't come from finding someone else, it came from finally being honest with yourself. A young man at the next table was sketching in a notebook, his expression focused and serene. The sight made Daniel smile. Not because of attraction, but because he recognized that quiet joy of creation, the same spark he had once buried beneath years of pretending. When he returned home, he hung one of his new paintings on the wall. It was abstract, shades of blue blending into streaks of gold, a storm turning into sunrise. Standing before it, he realized it wasn't just a painting. It was his story, turmoil giving way to truth, guilt dissolving into self-acceptance. That night, Daniel opened his journal and began to write. Not a confession, not a letter, just thoughts. Memories, questions, fragments of the person he used to be and the one he was becoming. "For years, I mistook comfort for happiness," he wrote. "I stayed where I was expected, not where I felt alive. But sometimes, losing everything familiar is the only way to find yourself again." The words came easily, like a conversation with his own soul. When he finally closed the journal, he felt lighter, like he'd let go of something invisible yet heavy. The next morning, the city woke to sunlight breaking through gray clouds. Daniel stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the crisp air. Below, life moved on, people rushing to work, the sound of a distant bus, laughter echoing from a nearby shop. That he smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because for once, it didn't have to be. As he turned to go inside, his phone buzzed with another message from Ethan. "Ethan, keep painting. The world needs your colors." Daniel read it twice before replying simply, "Daniel, I will. Thank you." He placed the phone down, looked once more at the morning light pouring into his room, and whispered to himself,